The conviction that the gospel opens up glorious possibilities for everyone compelled him to accept invitations here, there, and everywhere to speak on Christian life. His prowess as a speaker and preacher paved the way for another apostolate, this time in the written word, and he spent himself unstintingly in both fields in his efforts to communicate Christ, crucified and risen from the dead, not only in word, but in action as well. While he was in the parish of St. Mary's Cathedral, Edinburgh, with Greenside as his district, he developed an affection for the gospel's poor, those who live, as the Americans say, on the wrong side of the tracks, the marginated, those deprived in any way whatsoever. It was this zeal which prompted the founding of Martin House, a foolhardy adventure if ever there was one, which for 20 years offered warm hospitality and realistic care for women in a variety of difficult situations. It is not enough, the Lord tells us in the gospel, to offer shelter or bread or clothes. We are to offer ourselves. For Father Jock, this meant that his home, Marionville, Canmore, his room in Drygrange, was not only his, but belonged to anyone who cared to avail themselves of his hospitality. How remarkable that this intensely private person should become virtually public property. I found myself, when looking forward to having Jock as a partner in ministry in Kirkcaldy, wondering rather ruefully how I would cope with having my home life turned topsy-turvy. But Father Jock had quite a way with him, and before you knew it, you were caught up in what he was doing. He would encourage and enable others to share with him in his enterprises. Members of the St. Ninian's team ministry knew this only too well. People in the parish also know this very well. The ministry to the poor became, in Jock's wry phrase, a ministry of the up and ins to the down and outs, and the mutual advantage of them both. Jock's concern for the fourth world at home was matched by his concern for the needs of our sisters and brothers in the third world. With characteristic gusto, he threw himself into learning from the oppressed peoples of the Southern Hemisphere and prompted discussion and action in the great issues of justice and peace throughout the world. Father Jock spent 12 years in Drygrange. He contributed thoughtfully to the reshaping of seminary life, raised radical questions about the best ways of forming men for the priestly ministry. But it was as spiritual director that he made his greatest impact, particularly devoting his energies to developing a solid life of prayer in the priests of the future. In discussion, then as in later years, he delighted in tossing into the debate provocative and sometimes outrageous statements to startling effect when his listeners' opinions were shallow or ill thought out. To disconcerting effect, he employed in personal counseling the long, pregnant pause, which has become legendary among those of us who were with him as students. And he provoked much laughter when he would protest that his counseling was of the non-directive kind. Even when he left Drygrange, many priests found in him a helpful and sure guide, a compassionate confessor, an understanding confidant. Though gentle, he did not compromise the radical demands of the gospel, urging us to rise above mediocrity, believing the dictum that the good is often the enemy of the best. As a priest, Father Jock always intended to point to Christ. He must increase, I must decrease. More than any self-conscious advertising for vocations, his manner of living the priesthood has helped make ordinations in this parish church an almost annual event. Sinner that he knew himself to be, Jock threw himself on the mercy of God. This poor man called, and the Lord heard him and rescued him. The crucible of Father Jock's liberation was prayer. Despite his fluency in writing about prayer, his facility for teaching the ways of prayer, Jock did not always find praying easy, and perhaps only rarely so. Yes, he disciplined himself rigorously to prayer, but like Jacob, he wrestled with God in long, lonely hours of prayer. Liberation came here when he ceased to struggle and wrestle, and was schooled to surrender himself to God. His prayer became less complex, as did his life, and more of a gentle and serene merging with God at the ground of his being. What wonders the Lord has worked in him, and he would have us know what wonders the Lord is working in our lives as well. In a recent article, Father Jock wrote, "When we have found our soul, we can live fruitfully the ever-present tension caused by our high ideals received from the gospel and our distressingly low performance. United in God, in the depth of our being, we can not only survive this tension, but make it an instrument of our priestly work. At that deepest level, God meets me, and I meet God. At that level, all is grace and sheer thanksgiving." This funeral homily was published in the Clergy Review in September of 1985. Just saying, closing this foreword by Charles Barclay, I remember when I was deacon in St. Ninian's, Father Jock's room was simply his room. He had one room, not his own bathroom, not a bedroom and a sitting room, one room. And in it was his desk chair, a comfortable chair for sitting in that he sat in whenever we had conferences together, and a couch in which I usually sat. And I remember thinking early on, where does he sleep? Where is his bed? Could never figure it out. My room was downstairs, and outside the front door, on the level I was on, there was a little chapel with the sacrament there that was open 24/7, 365 for anyone who wanted to come in any time of day or night to pray. One morning I woke up early, about 4:30 or 5 a.m. Couldn't go back to sleep, and I decided that I'd go out, it was so near me, into that chapel for prayer. So I come out of my room, I can remember clearly now, open the door, close the door behind me, turn right and then left through the front door, and on the right, just outside the front door, was the door to the chapel. I very gently, so early in the morning, still dark, opened that door and began in, and the only light was the vigil lamp that was burning next to the sacrament. And before I took a step, thank God, as my eyes adjusted, I looked to the floor. And there, lying on the floor, head down, his arms crossed and his head resting on his hands, all night, and for all I know, every night, working on being a person of prayer, was Jock. I have to tell you, this is a man, as extraordinary as that sounds, who, when I knew him at St. Ninian's, could relate and did relate beautifully, humanly, openly, lovingly with everyone he met. He was a miracle in process. And I hope you're going to enjoy the book we're going to read together now, collected together from writings just after his death. Be back soon.